Okay, I think most people are saying now they can hear everything, which is great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and it's great to have so many of you here. This webinar forms part of the national evaluation for the National Lottery Community Fund's Fulfilling Lives programme. And this morning we're going to be focusing on the role of lived experience in system change. We've got a great lineup of speakers, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But I'll just run over some of the technical aspects with WebEx before we get going. So you'll notice that all of your microphones are muted, and that's just to make sure we get a good sound quality throughout. And once we get to the question and discussion sections, if you want to ask a question in person, then please do just unmute yourselves, and that's absolutely fine. There is also the chat box function as well, so should you want to post anything in there, please do, and I can ask it on your behalf instead. We will be recording today's webinar and we'll make it available later today, so should you want to share it with anyone, then please do. And it would be great to know who's in the audience. I can see some people have already popped in messages to say where they're from and what their role is, so please do join in and comment if you haven't already. We also encourage you to tweet about today's session, and our Twitter handle is up on the screen now, and that's FL Evaluation, so engage on Twitter as well if you can. So to start us off, I'd like to thank our speakers for joining us today and making this opportunity possible. To start us off this morning, we're going to hear from Chris Milner. Chris works at CFE Research and is part of the National Evaluation Team for Fulfilling Lives. Chris is going to be talking about the smartphone app that the National Evaluation Team developed to help document the role of lived experience in system change activity. And then following Chris, we'll hear from Sheila Blatchford. Sheila is an expert by experience from Fulfilling Lives Newcastle and Gateshead and is going to be talking about her experiences of using the app. Following Sheila, we'll hear from Phil Parks. Phil is the new volunteer coordinator with the Expert Citizens, and we'll be talking about influencing system change as an expert. And then last but not least, we're going to hear from Joe Welford from CFE Research. This was originally going to be Jatinder, another member of the National Evaluation Team, as advertised on the Eventbrite page, but this has since changed just for reference in case anyone's wondering. And Joe's going to be concluding the webinar by talking about the overall findings from the Lived Experience in System Change project that we've recently carried out. So with no further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Chris, if you give me one moment.
Thank you.
Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay. So, yeah, thanks so much for that, Beth. Morning, everyone, and thanks so much for everybody for coming. So, Beth's already introduced me, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris, and I'm a Senior Research Executive at CFE. So I've been with the National Evaluation Team at CFE for over 18 months now. And as you may know, we at CFE are the national evaluators of the Fulfilling Lives programme. And we've been carrying out some theme studies on elements of the Fulfilling Lives programme. And through this study, we've aimed to explore the impact of lived experience on systems change. So just a quick overview of what the Fulfilling Lives programme is for those of you who don't know. So the National Lottery Community Fund invested £112 million over 8 years in local partnerships in 12 areas across England, and helping those experiencing multiple disadvantage access more joined-up services and more tailored to their needs. And again, for those of you who don't know as well, multiple disadvantage is defined as experience of 2 or more of homelessness, substance misuse, reoffending, and mental ill health. You'll hear me talk a lot about experts today. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the programme, experts are experts by experience, in that they have lived experience of multiple disadvantage and use their expertise and their voice to give insight into the experiences of those who are currently affected by multiple disadvantage. So as Beth says, we're going to be hearing from Phil and Sheila, 2 of the experts who were researchers for us during this study, about their experience of the project. We're also going to hear from Joe Welford from CFE, who's going to be talking about some of the key findings from this research. But today I'm going to be taking you through the smartphone app we used as part of this study. We'll be thinking about the considerations we made when deciding to use the app, like how we hoped it would help us involve lived experience in the research, how we hoped it would help us capture the experiences of those seeking to affect systems change, and we'll also be thinking about the practicalities of using a data collection method, which is pretty novel and innovative. So what did we want to find out? So ultimately, this study is about finding out how those with lived experience contribute to systems change. We had interviews planned with partnership staff and interviews with external stakeholders, such as commissioners, policymakers, and service managers. But who better to ask about the impact they're having on systems change than the experts themselves? We were also planning to interview experts as well, which we did, but we wanted something that would really involve experts and be a bit more of an active form of involvement rather than an interview or a survey. So firstly, it was really important for us to know what systems change activities experts were attending. Each time experts took part in a systems change activity, we asked them what kind of event it was, so we were able to quantify what activities experts had taken part in over a 4-month period. So because we were talking to other stakeholders, like partnership staff and commissioners, they told us what impact they thought lived experience was having. But we wanted to know whether experts reported the same impact. Were they being told about the impact they'd had? Was it being reported back to them? What kind of impact did they have? And did they impact the other participants in the activity? Or was it something that was further reaching than that? We wanted to know from experts what it was really like to go to a systems change activity, such as a steering group or a workshop they were speaking at, or any number of other events which experts felt were aiming to influence systems change. We wanted to know how experts felt. So were they made to feel welcome? Were they given the support they needed? So why use a smartphone app for this? So, well, to be able to answer the questions that I've just posed in the last slide, we needed to capture experts' experiences at systems change activities as close to the event as possible. So we used pre-event and post-event questions to capture real-time data of experts' thought processes. So whether they felt nervous or prepared before, how much information they'd been given about the event beforehand and afterwards, whether experts felt like they'd been given the platform they needed to voice their opinion, whether they were listened to, whether they felt they contributed to systems change. To gather experts' views as accurately as we could, we wanted to know what they felt like there and then. Typically, we use interviews and surveys quite a lot in our research, and these are great tools, but they just didn't have that real-time aspect, and we wanted something to kind of build on the interviews that we were doing alongside the app. So generally, most people have a smartphone, but we were aware that experts may not have their own or be completely familiar with using it. To improve the experience for our experts, we chose to run 3 induction workshops where we discussed perceptions of what system change means. Took experts through the app and asked for their feedback on the wording and the tasks we used. This gave them the opportunity to create a profile on the app as well, to practice using the video and audio recording functions, and gave us the chance to make any changes that experts suggested. The workshops weren't just for the app though, and we wanted to impart what this project was really about, and make sure the experts knew that they were the researchers in this study, that they had real ownership and investment in this research. Again, not everybody has a smartphone, and we wanted to be as inclusive as possible, so we offered alternative collection methods for this. So these were paper versions of the questions we posed on the app, and we also gave them a dictaphone and a disposable camera as well. So very few participants did take up this alternative collection method option. So I won't dwell on it too much, but we knew that the app wouldn't be for everybody. And we knew that some experts would be more likely to have their own smartphone than others. So this was really important for us to consider as well. So it's important for me to say that none of us at CFE are app developers, and we didn't build the app from scratch. There are numerous app providers out there who provide an app which is almost ready-made for research. And we as the researchers could shape that platform to fit our needs with bespoke questions and tasks. So with CrowdLab, the app provider we chose, everything was available in one portal for the experts so that they could return back to the portal to complete each task as it unlocked for them. We also had a live dashboard where we could view the data experts were uploading and ask them any questions about any specific activity they'd participated in. We wanted something that was engaging and interactive, especially as we were aiming to collect data from experts over such a 4-month period, which is quite a long time. We were careful not to overwhelm experts with loads of questions, but having the option to interact with them directly was actually really useful. And in terms of fun, having tested the app ourselves, we found it pretty intuitive and actually quite fun to mess around with too. I mentioned a second ago about how we wanted to have rich data, and this wasn't necessarily just so we could take the videos and photos and put them straight into outputs, like reports, but it was to allow experts to use whichever method of communication was easiest for them. Experts mostly use videos or voice recordings, and occasionally photos, to describe their experiences of systems change activities. So in retrospect, it was actually a really useful feature for us to have on the app. So let's have a little look at the app interface, and this is the home page. So this is the screen that experts saw every time they logged in to use the app. So the top and the bottom buttons on this screen stayed the same throughout the project. So the top button takes experts through to just general information about the research and how they could get in touch with us, and CrowdLab for support with perhaps any technical issues that they were having. The bottom button takes experts through to a calendar style screen where they could send us any details of any events they were planning to attend during the data collection period. So if they knew they were going to a steering group on the 12th of April, they could tell us in advance. This is one of the things that we asked experts to do at the induction workshops. And the reasoning behind this was so that we could put these dates in our own calendars and send reminders to individual experts to complete certain tasks we were asking them to do on the day of the event. So what were these tasks we asked experts to complete? Well, there were 4 short tasks to do. And the first of these you can see in the middle of the homepage on the slide. And if I take you on to the next slide, you can see a sequence of screens which come up for the first task. So this is an opportunity for experts to tell us how they feel about attending the activity they're going to. And this is before they went. So I recognise that there's only 3 different moods on this screen, so don't worry, we recognise that people have more than 3 different moods. We did have more options as you scrolled down, and experts could choose a mood which wasn't on our list as well. Now, initially, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is a bit so what, but once experts did this, they were then asked why they felt like this. And this is where we could dig a little bit deeper into how prepared they felt, whether the organizer of the event had helped them feel prepared at all. You'll notice on the screenshot on the right that there are a few icons indicating, these indicate how experts could respond to this question using different mediums. So through voice recording, through photo, or using text or using video. You may have also noticed the little reminder on that right screenshot that media has to be limited to 3 minutes. Now, this is so that the media experts uploaded wouldn't take all day to upload, and also so that we as researchers could work with their data more easily. So this is the mood moment task, and this is one of the 4 short tasks experts did for each event they went to. And once they've done this one, the next one unlocked. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through what each of them looked like in detail, but we used another pre-event task in which we asked experts to tell us some more details about what they expected to happen at the activity. And then we used 2 post-event tasks to be completed after experts had been to the activity. So the first of these post-event tasks asked experts whether they had had the impact they expected they would, and why or why not. The second post-event task for each event harks back to the mood moment here. So this is where we asked experts to again describe how they felt after attending the event and why they felt like this. This is where we wanted to capture any differences between before the event and after. Were experts excited before the event but unhappy or despondent afterwards? I'm sure that Joe Welford will be going into this into a little bit more depth in terms of impact, but we were encouraged to find that almost all experts reported that they'd had an impact after the event. So I think it's really important now for me to talk a little bit about the considerations you have to think about when using an app for collecting data. So firstly, there's the time involved. Now, even though experts were going out and recording their experiences on behalf of us, we needed to create an interface which was intuitive and gathered the data we wanted to gather. We probably would have done some induction-style workshops if we hadn't have used the app, but we also had to make sure that we were well-versed enough on the app to be able to pass on that knowledge ourselves. We also created some user guides so that experts could look back at these to remind them of how to use certain features on the app. And we kept up with experts throughout the study as well. So we couldn't just expect to give experts the app and send them off on their merry way. It was important to us that we were there to help them. Now, all of this does take time, and this needs to be factored in as well. So that's a consideration to make there. Now, a couple of experts did mention that they would have liked to have been able to go back and change some of their app responses. Sometimes they wanted to add more or felt slightly differently to how they did when they originally answered an app question. Now, unfortunately, this isn't something which CrowdLab could facilitate for us. And actually, we thought it would be easier and a more accurate representation of experts' initial responses to not have that ability to go back and change answers. So when you're using technology, there's bound to be some teething issues, and CrowdLab isn't compatible with all smartphones. We made sure at the start of the study that experts had compatible smartphones, so we asked them to download the app before the induction workshop. Now, I think we were quite fortunate, actually, that everybody's smartphone was compatible, and CrowdLab is compatible with almost all smartphones as well. But it is important to have contingency plans in place in case they're not. And of course, contingency plans for those who don't have smartphones as well. That's where we brought in the alternative recording methods as well. Something else to think about then is mobile data. We knew that if experts uploaded their responses to the app whilst they were connected to their 4G or to their mobile data, it might drain it significantly. So we made sure that the app could be used without being connected to the internet. And then when experts connected to Wi-Fi, it would then upload their responses using that connection instead of draining mobile data. And when I say Wi-Fi, I mean actual internet rather than the partnership Wi-Fi. So not all apps have the capacity to work offline. And when we approached CrowdLab, this is one of the first things that we checked with them. So for those of you who are familiar with data analysis of any kind, you'll know that it's actually really useful if you have everything you're analysing in one place. Well, because we were using multimedia responses, this meant that we had to download these all separately and merge them into one file. So this isn't a huge problem for us, but it was just another thing for us to consider in terms of time. One of the things that we did try and do to make it less onerous to complete the task as an expert was to split up the tasks into smaller tasks, which, when completed, would then unlock the next task. We did have some minor issues with this, as it wasn't always clear to experts that they had to complete the 4 separate tasks for each event before they started recording their experiences for a following event. Now, this is probably something that we'd wanted to resolve earlier on, but this is something that we now know, and moving forward, we would try and address this earlier on. So just finally then, just thinking about some final thoughts and why use an app for this. So I'll be honest with you, we gathered a huge amount of data about experts' experiences at systems change activities, and genuinely a huge amount of data. So we used interviews with 9 of the experts to dig a little deeper into some of their app responses. And those interviews are, incredibly useful for that kind of exploratory element. But I can only imagine how much resource it would take for us to have gone to 40 different events ourselves and recorded details about those events. And that's also from an outsider's perspective as well. It doesn't involve lived experience in the way we want it to. Ultimately, we genuinely really pleased about how well the study went. And it's been really, really nice to hear back from the experts who have told us that it's something that they've really enjoyed taking part in, which for me is the greatest compliment. I think a big takeaway for us and for anyone else considering using an app to collect data with experts is that it worked really well. I'll let Phil and Sheila put it in their own words, but experts told us that the app was really intuitive, and especially in the current climate, using an app for research is definitely something to consider. Now, on that topic, actually, one of the ways that we were going to involve experts a little more was through an analysis workshop after they collected all the data. So we'd originally planned to bring all experts involved together at this analysis workshop to discuss the findings and ask them to build on what we'd found. Now, that was planned for April, and as you can probably guess, we had to cancel it. So after some head scratching, we decided we would release small sections of the findings to experts using the app. So over 6 weeks, we released 3 separate sections through the app and asked experts to feed back on it for us through the app. So the app was actually a really useful way for us to get the feedback from experts that we would have got from that analysis workshop. So that was incredibly useful for us. Now, that's about as much as I've got time to talk about today. It would have been fantastic to talk about that for a long time, actually. But thank you so much for listening, everybody. And I think now we're going to have some questions. So I'm sure everybody is really, really interested in the app. So I think I will just hand over to Beth to take any questions that anybody might have.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Chris. And that was excellent to kind of hear an overview of the project and kind of contextualise what exactly happened. We have got questions coming in. So to start us off, Gemma was asking, how did you define system change activity? And a similar questions come in from Sunny. So I'm just finding it now, saying, how was the activity and task conceptualised? So, for example, was it local strategy meetings, awareness workshops? How was system change measured?
Okay, so first off, I think it's important to recognise that measuring systems change is a very, very difficult feat, and it's totally subjective. So I think that we went into this thinking that we couldn't objectively measure it, not really anyway. And I think it was definitely based around the fact that it was up to the experts to define how they thought they'd influence systems change. And part of this app as well was not necessarily just to identify what objectively systems change, what systems change they'd made. It was about trying to distinguish the differences between what experts had recognised they've made impact-wise in comparison to what some of the other people were looking at. So I think one of the biggest findings, and I don't want to kind of encroach on what Joe's talking about here, but one of the biggest findings was that experts were talking about the direct impact they have on other attendees at these activities a lot more. So talking less about the kind of far-reaching impact that stakeholders and partnership staff did recognise, but I think it just wasn't getting back to experts about the lasting impact that they were having. On systems change activity, again, another thing is very difficult to define. The way we went about it was thinking that a systems change activity is anything which at least aims to influence systems change, either on a direct level or indirectly. So thinking about perhaps policy change, thinking about something that's going to affect somebody on a lower level. So perhaps experts are coming into contact with people who work at services who are then going to make slight changes to their own practice, which might influence other people's practice as well. So I think the answer is systems change impact is very, very difficult to define. And in that way, we allowed experts to define it in their own way, but gave them a kind of idea of how we would like to. I don't know whether Joe or anybody else would want to jump in there and just say any more about the impact.
I could say something quickly. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I think probably what Chris has said is it was quite interesting for us. We perhaps came in with a more narrower version of what we thought a systems change activity might be, such as, attending a committee or, quite a formal activity. And then when we held the workshops with the experts, it was quite interesting that actually their understanding of a systems change activity was actually much broader than that. And a lot of the things that they did was about raising awareness, and I'll talk about this when we come to the findings, but, challenging perceptions, and that has been that first step to systems change. So actually we ended up, on the basis of feedback from the experts themselves, broadening out what we were including as a systems change activity. And obviously, it's very hard to draw a line between what is and what isn't, but, we tried to be as broad as we could, just to allow experts themselves to sort of acknowledge and define what they felt a systems change activity was, if that helps.
Brilliant.
Sharon said something similar in the comments there.
Yeah, and questions. I'll take questions now around the app specifically, and then anything more kind of broader around system change. I think once Joe's spoken to conclude the webinar as well, that might kind of cover some of the questions we have, if that's all right. So the final question, Chris, that I'll ask is, what biases are you acknowledging on what has been missed and kind of the way that the data was collected?
I suppose in terms of biases, yeah. So thinking about the fact that it was so broad a definition of systems change impact, that I suppose the bias there is about, I think bias is a difficult word. Bias for me is subjectivity. So I think what I was talking about in terms of system change impact being so broad and so subjective, I think that it's always going to be subject to some biases. So I think we do make allowances in our report and acknowledge that there will be some biases in terms of subjectivity, but I'm struggling to kind of understand exactly what you mean by bias, Gemma. So, sorry for that. I just want to kind of understand that before I answer.
Sorry, I've asked quite a few questions. Hello. I guess just in understanding the app as an interface, it's very much subjective on, and rightly so, as you explained, I think, I can't see your name, but that the practitioner's interpretation and experience of systems change and their understanding of it. So I'm wondering, therefore, it can come down to just, as probably as I work at the Children's Society, and we do have a really broad understanding of systems change, and every practitioner often understands that differently. So for one practitioner, that might be, no, it's only if you're creating a level of change at the top, at a big lever in the system, and to another, it's about the incremental behaviour change. So I guess what I mean by the bias is it's always down to that person's perspective on how you explain systems change, because it's open for interpretation. But also, by narrowing it into this way to collect information, it's being collected at a particular point in time at the event, as opposed to what is the long-term change you've seen in the system in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
Like, what's the goal? So I'm just trying to find what's that goal they're getting behind.
Of course, yeah. So we recognise that. Sorry, Jo has just sent me a message and said she'll jump in for this one, so I'll pass over to her for this one.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to sort of reiterate that what we collected through the app was only one part of the data collection. So that was our sort of very focused on the experts themselves, how they felt, what they were doing. And then we contextualized that by, first of all, doing follow-up interviews with the experts themselves. So after a period of reflection time, we could ask them, okay, you were really excited about a potential impact, you know, a month down the line. Have you seen anything? You know, has there been the kind of changes that you expected? And then also the stakeholder interviews that we did as well, they could talk much more about the longer term stuff that they'd, you know, been involved in this for a while and they've seen change over time and they know it can be slow and everything like that. So yeah, I suppose just to say that we understand that the app in itself only collected a certain type of data from a certain perspective, but we did sort of build that up with different methods as well and different perspectives. So hopefully when I talk about the findings towards the end of this session, that is based on all of those sources of evidence. Hopefully that helps.
Brilliant. And thank you to everyone else for some really interesting discussions and comments in the chat box. So please do keep them coming. So with no further ado, I'd now like to hand over to Sheila. So Sheila is an expert by experience from Fulfilling Lives Newcastle and Gateshead. So over to you, Sheila, whenever you're ready.
Hi, so I'm Sheila, and I'm a member of the Newcastle Gateshead Fulfilling Lives Experts by Experience network. And I was involved with the CFE research into lived experience and systems change projects. And as part of this role, as part of the project, we went to the one-day training session that Chris mentioned, and that was an introduction to the project and our role in it. So we were shown a new app, which was to help with the data collection. And during the day, we were asked about how we share our lived experience and how we help towards system change. So we discussed things like the opportunities that we take part in as members of the expert network and how and who we talk to spread the word that there's more than one way to do this. We also talked about events that we went to, so our role in those events and how we felt we were contributing to systems change. And finally, looking at ways to document this, because as Gemma mentioned there, system change can mean different things to different people. So coming back to the app, we were shown the CrowdLab app, and that was used to record how we felt before and after the events that we attended, and how we contributed, or how we felt we contributed to system change, and how we felt our involvement had assisted the event. Now, as you can see from the slide, the first image shows some information for creating the account. There's an email address and some basic information, which was quite easy to set up. We then logged in and we were taken to a main screen, which isn't shown here. And we had to put in a unique code for the study that we were taking part in. So obviously we don't want our information going off to some other project. Now, we started to input details for the activities that we would be involved in during the course of the project. And this was to include, as you can see, the name of the event and dates and times for when we're attending. And sorry about this. And that was so that we could get the reminder from the app before the event to make sure that we filled in some details about how we felt prior to taking part in the event and what we hope to achieve during the event. And then after the event, we'd have some more questions such as how we felt the event had gone, and whether or not we felt we'd contributed to this event. So the questions were easy to answer with options other than just typing in our answers. So Chris alluded to the audio, to the pictures, to type it in or to use a video. Now, personally for me, back in the days before Zoom, there was no way I was going to put a video on there. But obviously things have changed now, so that is an option that I would use going forward. So when we'd stopped recording the information, we were due to come back together, and because of the pandemic, it just couldn't happen. So instead of just carrying on the way that sometimes happens is organisations will do it themselves because it's just easier. And what CFE did was to send us the information via the app so that we could give feedback on the information that they were getting, and so that we could share our opinions of what we'd done and how we felt the report was coming on, which was brilliant because we were already familiar with using the app, so it was just a continuation of the research. For me, it was a brilliant experience, and I've written down that as we're coming out the other side of this pandemic and we start to looking to go back to systems change activities, I look to be able to continue my role and possibly take some of the learning forward into my own methods and research. It is and has been a fantastic experience being part of this project and using new technologies to record the data, because it helped me to see that even small conversations can make a big difference. Any questions?
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Sheila. It was great to hear your experiences of using the app, and the comment you said at the end I found particularly great about how actually it made you realise that those kind of small conversations and small areas of involvement can actually lead to something much bigger. I wondered if, Sheila, how did it compare to other experiences? If you've been involved in other research projects, did you kind of compare this method, prefer this method, or what was your take on that?
I've done quite a few peer research projects through Fulfilling Lives, and this was, as a participant using the app, was amazing. It was just so much easier. I've always got my phone on me. I don't have to worry about writing notes in a book so that I can feed back. It was all there. I filled it in, hit enter, and it was gone. It was finished as far as I was concerned, because I was usually running from one place to another. So in that respect, it's a lot easier. I would love to see what the back end of the system looks like, because as I go forward, I'm off to uni next month, and we're going to be doing research projects and things. So personally, I would like to be able to incorporate using an app, because it does seem to be the way forward, especially if we're not in community. We're not able to meet face to face and do the whole face-to-face interviews in person. So using Zoom and the Webex and all the different online platforms is all well and good, but some people just do not like the app, the online video call aspect.
Yes, so, it sounds like in your experience, it made it quite accessible, actually, just being able to account for your experiences whilst you're out on the go and kind of actually on a day-to-day basis doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant. We've got another question that's come in. Is there anything more that CFE could have done to involve you and the experts further in the research?
To be honest, I don't think so. Obviously, we've got a lot of information prior to the project, and on the workshop day, we went to Leeds. There was another workshop somewhere else, and we were able to talk to CFE, to Chris and the others. Sorry. And we were able to have conversations about what was expected from us and what we could expect from CFE. So there was a lot of kind of involvement at the beginning, and then even throughout filling in the app and going to different events and filling in before and afters. There was conversations, there was emails, phone calls. I did a phone interview at one point, but I never felt as if you were just taking information from me and it being a one-way street. I always felt involved because I was told what was happening.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that communication is so important, isn't it, for you?
It is. And I think as well, because we had an idea from the workshop of what it was that we were hoping to do, and the fact that we were recording how we saw system change and how the events that we attended, how we saw those in respect to systems change. It was really interesting. And then again, coming back, instead of having another workshop to look through the findings, it was done on the app. So it was very much a continuation, and we still had emails and phone calls. There was still that two-way conversation, which felt like we were still involved. We were still being involved in the production of the final report.
Amazing. And lots of comments coming in, Sheila, kind of thanking you for your presentation, and people have found it very interesting. So thank you ever so much.
No problem. I do enjoy talking.
That's always good, always good. So just looking at the time, I'll hand over to Phil now, if that's all right, and then we've got a bit of time after Phil as well for questions again. So if there's anything that you want to ask Sheila in the meantime, pop it in the chat box and we can come back to that in a moment. So Phil, I'm just about to hand over to you. And yeah, you are now unmuted. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name's Phil Parks. I'm the new volunteer coordinator at Expert Citizens. During the time I was part of this, I was a volunteer at Expert Citizens, and I've been a volunteer for about 5 years. So I've got a bit of experience of going on and doing some system change activities, and attempting to anyway. Can I flip over myself, or do you need to flip over slides?
You should be able to do it yourself. So that toggle that's at the left-hand side.
Oh, yeah, but I forgot.
That's all right.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
Wrong way. That's the one. Just talking about my involvement in what I actually did throughout the course, and as I say, I've been a volunteer at Expert Citizens for about 5 years, which led me to becoming the volunteer lead for Stoke-on-Trent for the National Expert Citizens Group. So I've attended multiple events throughout the time where at the NECG meetings, we basically get all the local goings on from and we discussed them at a national level. So there could be problems that are national problems like drug misuse, mental health, and then we discuss on a national level and see how the problems that we are experiencing nationally, how if one area is handled it in one way, which could be used in another way. So system change was being kind of hinted at during that. I also, as part of my role at Expert Systems, was an insight evaluator. So that kind of entailed going into services and, as it says, evaluating those services, but we did it in a positive inquiry type of fashion. So what we'd do is we'd ask the service where they thought they were. We would interview the management, the frontline staff, the customers, as whichever terminology you want to use, and then their partners, and we would get a full rounded view of where that service was, what that service was doing correctly, and the best ways and that service could, if possible, improve on what they were doing. So we take all the information we had, we give them our evaluation of where they were, which fell upon 4 levels, which was welcoming people with lived experience, listening to people with lived experience, learning from people with lived experience, and leading the way in a way of like informing other services of the good work they were doing so that other services could improve. So we would give them what level they were currently at, and then we give them as many pointers as we felt they needed to identify areas where they could hopefully improve and gain extra levels when they could use these evaluation levels as watermarks on their paperwork, which throughout the process of Expert Citizens and these evaluations, they have gained quite a bit of traction, and they're really good for companies to actually use to say, yes, this is where we've been rated, and so it's been a good like two-way street in that way, that we've been able to speak to those companies and get them to hopefully improve where they're going, and then they've been able to use our evaluation level that they are at to advertise how good they've been. And as well as all those, I was involved with quite a few other meetings. Quite a few of them were actually through the NECG. I was involved with a SCAN meeting, which is the Systems Change Activation Network, which was all the leads from the Fulfilling Lives groups meet and discuss what is similar to the NECG, but it is the management leads who discuss where they feel that their area is at, but they obviously have more insight into what's going on a management level to discuss the systems change things, what can be achieved. As well as that, I was involved in 3 comms meetings, which is the communications group, which is all through Fulfilling Lives as well, where we were discussing national campaigns, just again of ways to. Some of it was to change public opinion. Some of it was to be aimed at people in power to hopefully take notice and judge, change how they worked. As for the impact of the work, I feel that for me, during this time, I was recently sober, and I was using this as well as everything else to give my life, to give myself a bit of meaning and fulfillment in life. So going out and knowing that the things I was doing was changing even public opinion in the room sometimes. I was involved in some meetings where I was saying my point of view, talking with loads of professional people who 6 months prior to that wouldn't have thought would have given me the time of day. And I was getting them to listen to me, agree with me, come up to me afterwards and ask me further questions. And it was eye-opening, to be honest, because I was unaware that me using my lived experience in this way and just talking about things that I'd been through and my opinions on how different things could work could have that effect on people. And so I enjoyed all that part. And as for the impact on services, as I've said, of some of the things that I've been doing, as part of the insight evaluations, I know that a few of those places that I went out to conduct an evaluation, I've actually taken our recommendations and have actually started to make changes to the way they working to hopefully improve their service for the next person, which is what this is all about for me. With the NECG, I know that we have got Dame Carol Black coming to the next meeting, which a review is going to be massive and hopefully changing some sort of the way the systems work and the drug and alcohol rehabilitation and changes. So I'm hoping that a better system change will come along through that. And with the national campaigns, they're up and running, and I feel that they are gaining a bit of traction. For my recommendations, these are personal ones, and obviously they do take into account the recommendations that is made on the documentation. But for me, it's just a case of making sure that lived experience people are not there on a tokenistic level. That we're not there just to be sat in a corner or sat on a video call on mute, to make sure that whoever is control can say that yes, we've had somebody from lived experience there, but we've asked them no questions. We've not listened to them. We've had somebody from lived experience there. To follow on from that, I also feel like it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of scenario. That we do need to make sure that people who want to be involved in certain areas are involved in certain meetings. So if somebody's likes to be creative and write blogs, they're involved in meetings on that type of stuff. If somebody wants to go out and make videos, they're involved in those sorts of meetings. So I think it's making sure that people are involved in the correct sort of meetings, so they can go away and take tasks from those meetings. I do believe that making sure that we can leave with a task, so we know that we've taken something from a meeting, is quite important. And also that we may be in meetings where we have not got the full training and provided, but I think that making sure that every meeting that we go to, if there's something that we need training and support to continue with that task, that it is provided. I've been lucky enough with places in Stoke that our training and learning advisor has always been there to support me, and I'm sure that it's the same in most fulfilling lives areas. But I feel that is important for going forward to ensure that people with lived experience can go out, take part in these meetings, and in turn help to enact some system change. I do realise that I did waffle a bit then, so I do apologise. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Phil. It was really interesting to hear kind of the different ways you've been involved in system change activity and kind of how you've reflected on the process as well, and how it's helped maybe your own recovery as well, which is great. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask them in person. So we've got loads of really positive comments coming through, Phil. Loads of people thanking you and saying it was really interesting. So nice work. I have a question for yourself or Sheila, and both of you, if you wish. Kind of given some of the comments earlier from people, I'd like to know what kind of is your perception of what counts exactly as system change activity?
I think that, I'll just go first, I'll be very quick. I think it can be anything, to be honest. I think that I think if you're starting from the bottom and working your way up, it works a lot better. It's a very controversial view. Maybe a controversial view, but I think that if you're making small changes in a local area, and those changes are actually making a difference, then the people in there who control on a national level will be able to take note of those changes, notice that it's probably saving them money, it's working well, and then it might be changed nationally rather than to try and go straight in on a national level and change, which is very hard to do. But that is my opinion.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that. And I think that's really important what you're saying around kind of how that one, those smaller kind of aspects of change and involvement can then lead to something much bigger. So it's almost seeing that as a ripple effect and kind of how it can affect the wider system. And I think what you've just said, Phil, ties really nicely to a comment from Lee earlier that said that how experts by experience are able to attend meetings and have done now for years is system change for Lee himself. And he started as an expert and is now a development officer and has kind of that role of influence and change, which is amazing to hear. Just seeing if any other questions have come in.
Can I just about systems change? Being a student, I speak to a lot of other students, and talking about the Fulfilling Lives, the expert network, and multiple complex needs, things like that. Being able to talk to those people about the things that I do and that I'm involved with makes a difference to them, so hopefully will affect the way that they work when they're finished at university. I think it can be the small conversations that can make a difference to the way that people work. So it might be that we're listening or we're talking about something that seems inconsequential, but it can have a big impact on people and the way that they work, or the way that they look at their work with people with multiple complex needs. So for me, even, as I say, even the conversations with students, and these are psychology students and social work students, it's it's about being able to say that, you know, it's not just what you see. There generally is a lot more going on in the background, and it's about getting to know people to be able to help them in the best way for them. It's not about us ticking boxes. It's about getting into the nitty-gritty and learning something about people that helps the future, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sheila. And I think what you've said there really chimes quite nicely to discussions we've had around system change activities. So it doesn't have to be, I think it was a comment from Sharon, it doesn't have to be always based around policies and procedures. It's actually that cultural and behavioural change as well. And those conversations you're having with kind of the future generation of social workers, that's so kind of important and crucial that they're hearing your own kind of experiences and learning from that. Comment from Sunny as well. So Sunny is a leader who activated his lived experience of social harms. He set up and developed peer-led services in his city and has pushed for system change at a national level for a number of years. He's also one of the founding members of LEX, so Lived Experience Leadership, which is an impact collective. So thanks for sharing the link there, Sunny. What I'll do as well is when I share kind of the slides from today with attendees, any links that have been shared as well, I can include on there. So thank you ever so much. And thank you, Sheila and Phil, for your really valuable contributions today. So last but not least, I'm going to now hand over to Joe. So Joe is a member of the National Evaluation Team at CFE Research. So over to you when you're ready, Joe.
Thanks, Beth. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great stuff. So, first of all, thanks very much to Chris, Sheila and Phil for introducing the project and the methods we used and the impact of this type of work from their perspective. And thanks again to everyone who's joined the webinar today and made some really kind of valuable contributions through the chat as well. That's really helpful to almost challenge the way we're thinking about things as well, so do keep them coming. I'm now going to talk through some of the findings from this study. As Chris already explained, a great deal of real-time data was collected through the app, and then we also had a series of interviews with experts, lived experience team leaders, and wider stakeholders to sort of supplement this. So the findings I'm going to introduce here are from all of these sources of evidence. One thing to note, partnerships often have different names for their lived experience groups. I'm going to mostly use the term experts, as these individuals are often kind of referred to as experts by experience, and it's much quicker as well to just say experts. So the findings relate to three key questions that we started this research with. So firstly, how are people with lived experience contributing to systems change? So what type of activities are they involved in? What do they do when they are there? Are they involved for a period of time, etc.? Secondly, what is the impact of their involvement? We've already started to discuss some of this, and for this we're interested in two aspects. So the impact on systems, crucially what difference they might be making to services, ways of working, organisational cultures or policies, but also that impact on the individual themselves that Phil and Sheila have both talked about already. And this can be both a positive and a negative impact, and each of these pinpoint things that feed into our final question, which is what needs to be in place for this type of work or involvement to be effective. So here we were looking for things that seem to have worked well and lessons learned that might be useful to anyone involved in this type of work going forward. And from this, we have a few recommendations to help the impact of this work to be maximised and be as beneficial as possible for all involved. So the first question we had was about the different ways in which experts contribute to systems change activities. And there appears to be at least three different mechanisms for this that I'll go through now. We've already had a discussion about what might count as a systems change activity, and as explained, we left this fairly open to the experts to define themselves, and then we collated what they reported they were doing under this remit. Firstly, experts took part in a number of awareness-raising activities. So the aim of this type of work is really to get multiple disadvantage on the political agenda and start to challenge any stigmatising perceptions that people might hold. Activities of this type included creating online or radio content, speaking at local events, often about their own experiences and telling their own stories. Now, this might not directly lead to systems change, but is an important part of starting to generate changes in attitudes and increasing awareness of multiple disadvantage That's a key step in creating wider or more systemic changes. Experts who took part in these type of activities were really positive about the experience. They valued the opportunity to share their experiences and were enthusiastic about the prospect of this contributing to sort of changes further down the line. The second type of activity is gathering evidence and providing insight into the lives of people with experience of multiple disadvantage, usually from the perspective of a current service user. This was the most common type of activity actually reported by experts through the app, and included peer research and mystery shopping, both of which can feed back to services and offer recommendations for change. Peer researchers can help to gather evidence and insights that might otherwise not be available due to the rapport they can build with current service users, and also help give a voice to those with relevant perspectives and experiences, particularly thinking about current service users here, who may not be able to contribute to decisions about services more directly through formal activities. So the third type would be this type, what we perhaps understood as systems change activity, from our perspective at the start of this project, is something that involves having an input into the design or delivery of policy or services. So we know that fulfilling life's partnerships have helped to facilitate the involvement of people with lived experience in consultations, plan new services or initiatives, and as well as one-off and time-limited consultations, some experts have achieved permanent positions on committees and strategic boards, such as national public health committees, mental health trusts, drug-related death task force, homelessness partnerships, and a group working towards drug and alcohol management and harm reduction. So of all the activities, these have the most tangible link to systems change, as they can bring experts the closest to the level of decision-making where influence can be possible. And experts who are involved in activities designed to directly influence policy and services were overwhelmingly positive after the event about their contribution. Most were happy that they had participated, and all reported that they felt would be an impact on services or policies from their involvement. Overall, you can see that these three areas of activity cover quite a broad range, and some are closer to what we might see as systems change from a policy or organisational perspective. So our second question was around the impact that being involved in system change activity can have. As I introduced earlier, there's two aspects to this: the impact that it might have on systems and the impact on the experts themselves. When we look at what impact lived experience input can have on systems, there are also three aspects to this, and these do have some alignment with the previous slides. So firstly, a major impact, and the one most often referred to by experts, was in improving people's attitudes of and awareness of multiple disadvantage. When they reported potential impact through the app after attending an activity, impacting the attitudes of others was the most common, because this is something that's visible to experts, as opposed to changes that systems that might take longer or be more distant from their involvement. Experts reported things like feeling that they were being listened to, participants responding to their stories, and that they could see that it was making them think differently. Activities designed to raise awareness obviously have this intended impact, but other things such as attending workshops or formal events can also have this impact on other attendees that are there on the day. Face-to-face interaction and personal testimony can have a sort of highly powerful and therefore lasting impact on participants. Hearing directly from experts can bring to life issues and help people see the human story behind facts and figures. It's also understood that this takes time, but changing perceptions is a vital first step. And Sheila and Phil both discussed how these are important small steps that can then feed into bigger changes. Experts and wider stakeholders also discuss changes to ways of working and service delivery as a result of lived experience input. So this could be frontline staff immediately changing their working practices or attitudes after attending training workshops or other events, or a more considered change to the way a service is delivered locally in response to peer research findings. Experts have also been involved in redesigning service delivery or suggesting environmental changes to buildings, particularly sort of looking at psychologically informed environments. Hearing from service users directly can motivate organisations and their staff to do things differently to try to prevent disengagement, and experts have had quite a vital role to play in describing the experiences of using services, and this can be really helpful in understanding why some people leave services or don't use them in the first place. This can then motivate organisations and their staff to do things differently and encourage engagement. And of course, listening to user experiences and having lived experience input is actually a change to working practices in itself. So formal changes to policy and strategy, as already outlined, is the best way to ensure the sustainability of any changes that might occur. An informal change to working practices might depend on the drive of a team leader, for example, but if it's written into a policy, it has a better chance of becoming embedded over the long term. And this can, of course, take longer to achieve than changing individual attitudes and also involve many different actors. So it's hard to attribute precisely the influence of involving people with lived experience. But, you know, we did find examples of several policy and practice changes made by, for example, police, housing providers, local authorities, and drug and alcohol services that was felt to have resulted from learning and input from people with lived experience. And almost all of the reported impacts on policy happened as a result of ongoing relationships built between partnerships, experts, and stakeholders through recurring meetings and consultations. You know, Phil's already talked about this, but you know, only involving experts in one-off events can be seen as tokenistic. And stakeholders and fulfilling life staff did acknowledge that although co-production is still not fully understood by decision makers, this sort of genuine involvement of lived experience was becoming more widespread in their local area, with experts now involved in more decision-making processes than before. And in some cases, commitment to co-production has been formalised through processes such as co-production accreditation programme for services. And then this is kind of the sort of change that can help to be long-lasting and sustainable. Again, looking at all three of these areas, we can see that there's different levels of impact, and it's not all about having a formal policy change, as there are steps required to get to this degree of systems change. But we also think this is multi-directional, hence the arrow going both ways, because a change to policy, whilst it might take a long time and be more difficult, that can then also filter down to those other changes and result in shifting attitudes as well. As well as having an impact on the systems around them, it's important to understand the impact it can have on the individual expert or the collective group of experts. This slide shows a few of the reported positive impacts. Phil already discussed some of these, so I won't repeat what he said, but you can see that there's a number of different ways in which this type of engagement can have a really positive effect on the lives of those who take part. It can help to contribute to recovery, allow experts to build their experience of this type of work, and that helps them to be in a good position for any future opportunities that might arise. Chris talked about the mood moment question that we had in the app, and it was great that most reported being happy or excited before and after attending systems change activities, so it's definitely a positive experience on the whole. Being part of a group with other experts definitely seems to foster a sense of community. And then the final point on this list may be overlooked sometimes, but it was interesting to hear that by engaging with frontline workers, perhaps those in a crisis service that they might have had a negative experience of in the past, and learning more about their roles and responsibilities and how difficult this can be sometimes, can humanise the individual and challenge stereotypes on both sides. So rather than just challenging, stigma and preconceptions around people with experience of multiple disadvantage, this can actually be a two-way process as well. Of course, it's important to acknowledge that this type of engagement can pose some challenges for experts. And for example, this second point here, we know that experts can sometimes take on more responsibility than they can feasibly manage, or they don't want to say no, or there are just so many demands on the time of what might be quite a small group of experts in that local area. And this can lead to burnout, maybe even risk of relapse, which can also be triggered by being repeatedly asked to tell their personal stories. If experts are repeatedly giving their input and not seeing any changes happening, this can also be frustrating. But of course, this is always going to happen because seeing change can take time. And this final point, experts might not want to have that lived experience label follow them around all of the time. Some felt that there was a danger that people would not look past that and it ends up defining them when there is actually much more to them as individuals than that. And at some point, they might want to leave that part of their life behind. So our final question. One key aspect of this research was to be able to share what seems to be a good way of doing this type of work well. Obviously not having all the answers here, but things that are being learned as partnerships are trying new things and this type of work is growing. And there are a number of recommendations that we make in our report. we think there's two aspects to this. Firstly, supporting experts, and secondly, organisational change. So firstly, experts will likely need support, although, up front we want to acknowledge that this should not be assumed. Individuals are all different and they will have differing needs. But support could include linking experts to opportunities, providing information in advance, maybe logistical support like transport. Some form of collective support is also important, so a shared space, a community of experts with a manager or team leader who is known and trusted is really valued. There might also be need for developmental support, such as training, skills or confidence, etc. Again, any support should be designed around the individual, so their stage of recovery, situation, past experiences, etc. And it should not be assumed that experts need a high level of support or management in order to take part in systems change activities. Just as important as the support for the experts themselves, and perhaps more important in some cases, is the changes needed from an organisational perspective. Some organisations or staff within the organisation might need to implement changes in order to make the most of this type of work and for it to be as effective as possible. For example, the first point, making changes to address any power imbalances. Now, these are always going to remain when you have perhaps current or ex-service users in a room with decision makers, but steps can be taken to reduce this. Holding meetings or other events in spaces that are more comfortable for the experts rather than always expecting experts to go to the meeting itself, perhaps in intimidating or unfamiliar environments all the time. That can demonstrate a commitment to trying to redress that in some ways. As we've already said, it's crucial that lived experience involvement is not tokenistic. So it's about finding a way to sustain and embed expert involvement, such as giving a permanent place on a committee or inviting experts back time and time again. One key piece of reflection from experts was that often they don't hear what happens following their involvement. So feedback's important, but also having experts involved at all stages of the process. For example, if they attend a workshop to feed into a new strategy or policy, also giving them the opportunity to review any future drafts of this work and stay engaged in the process. It goes without saying that cultural changes and then any subsequent changes to policy or practice require buy-in throughout the organisation. Senior buy-in, of course, is vital for change to occur at that level, but also if frontline staff are not convinced of the value of lived experience input or dismiss feedback from this source, then change is unlikely to happen. This might require staff development or training. And then finally, sharing the benefits of involvement, such as success stories and positive changes as a result of lived experience input, can also help with buy-in, particularly for an organisation that might be unsure of the value of this type of work. Well, this is a sort of quite a complex subject, and we certainly can't cover everything here, but I just want to kind of leave with 3 concluding remarks. The final report is going to be published next month, and there'll be a lot more detail on everything I've discussed here, as well as some examples from partnerships. But firstly, I suppose the closer that experts can get to decision makers, the better position they will be in to influence change, and change that is long lasting. Having input into the design and delivery of policy and services is the way this is most likely to be achieved. However, this should not underplay the value of changing attitudes and getting multiple disadvantage on the agenda. This is like such a vital foundation for any future change, as without this shift in attitudes, organisations or stakeholders would be less open to the value of this work and the need for change. Secondly, is the point that experts might need support designed on an individual case-by-case basis, but organisations and staff within these, from frontline staff to the CEO and any other decision makers, also need to adapt to be able to make the most of the opportunity and access as many of the benefits as possible. Finally, and this has been throughout the presentation today, hopefully this is banging quite a key point. And Phil stressed this as well, is that lived experience involvement, it can't just be a tick box exercise or something that is done as a one-off to demonstrate that there's been this input. It really does need to be a genuine long-term commitment. And this, this isn't easy to do. It will likely involve a cultural shift in attitudes and perhaps quite a dramatic shift in work and practices to embed this as a part of the way that an organisation might work. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jen. Time for questions. So do unmute yourselves if you have anything to ask. We've got lots of interesting discussion coming through in the chat box. So Sunny commented how there's a great deal of complexity to strategic commissioning and the funding landscape, and it's compounded by that siloed approach at a local and national level. And Lee kind of echoed that comment, saying that organisations shouldn't bid against each other, but kind of that joint partnership approach is really essential to this, and kind of actually giving people with lived experience the agency is what's really important, kind of at the heart of this. Dean's also commented, I know you'd mentioned, Joe, a couple of things that we need to consider, kind of when we think about the role of lived experience in system change, and extra things to consider there would be around resources and income, and a comment that communities are their own experts. So thank you for that, Dean. Any other questions or comments? Wow, silence from you, Joe. You did mention the report, Joe, so that's coming out next month, is it?
Yep, it's just been, the design work is just being carried out at the moment. So yeah, we imagine by mid-September that will be out on our website. So if people are signed up to a newsletter or anything, they'll hear about it that way. Otherwise, it'll be on our website and Twitter and everything.
Brilliant, thank you. Lots of comments coming in, so thanks to all the speakers. It's been really interesting. So Sunny is asking, what will be done with this research?
So we always try and publicise this as widely as possible. See, this is a National Lottery Community Fund project, and they also fund other similar projects like this that focuses on what can be done to make improvements in this type of area. So that will, it's something that they can publicise as well. And, we know that this is not an easy thing to implement change. Resources are stretched at the moment more than ever. And, getting a commitment to this type of involvement at all levels of an organisation that's required can be quite difficult. So we do just obviously keep publicising what we do as far and as widely as possible. And a lot of the fulfilling lives partnerships do have sort of some quite powerful connections in their local areas, and they can feed these reports into those discussions and those partnerships that they're part of as well.
Brilliant. There was an earlier comment, Sheila, if you're still on and able to answer this, there was an earlier question that I didn't get a chance to come to, and it was around lived experience leadership. So how did you kind of feel that you developed your own leadership as a result of involvement in the project?
Good question. I've become very opinionated over the last couple of years. So if I have something to say, I generally say it. I'm quite direct. And I'm nice about it. I think something that I've noticed is that people generally listen when you're not beating them with a stick. So my brother coined the phrase challenge to the journey. So I think it is about talking to people and not at them. Especially when it comes to lived experience, I know that a lot of people in my networks have got bad experiences of working with some services and can't say anything nice about them. But one of the things that I've done is to actually talk to people, get stories, and then use other people's stories to create something so that I can take it in and say, this isn't working. These are the experiences of some of my peers, and you need to change something in such a way that it doesn't come across as me saying sort it out or else.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear that you feel like you've kind of developed personally as a kind of result of taking part in these activities, Sheila, I think.
Yeah, for me, sorry.
No, you go, Phil.
I was just going to say, for me, it's been, it's developing like my own knowledge of place and some of these places. Like, it's knowing, like, me personally knowing what meetings I should be attending, what meetings I should be saying no to because I haven't got time, or that it doesn't fall within my remit and I feel that somebody else should be taking the lead on that. And just knowing my worth, it's got me to develop and know my worth. So I'll go through to whichever meeting it is, knowing that my opinion and my lived experience and what I'm offering is worth something, and if that's not taken seriously, I will not go to a meeting of that nature again. So it's helped me develop that, and which is in turn helps me to gain employment recently.
Amazing. Yeah, I was just about to say that, Phil. Congratulations on your new position, and for Sheila, going to university in September too. So really exciting times ahead for both of you.
Yep.
Question that I'm probably going to pose to Joe and Chris. So a comment to say how good it is to see the evidence of benefits that being engaged in system activities has on the individuals themselves. Is there any planned work around how kind of the impact this has on system change work, and if it's better due to the fact that lived experience is kind of involved in that and is part of that?
Yeah, I just was reading that comment actually, and I think that's a fair point. You know, we're doing an evaluation of the Fulfilling Lives programme, and a key part of their work is that lived experience is involved in, is, you know, sort of central to everything that the partnership does and all of their work. So we don't have that sort of comparison of actually what happens if that's not involved. But we did have, you know, some of the stakeholders could talk about, you know, how this has changed from how they used to work in the past and what sort of added value that lived experience can bring to that. And I suppose that's probably the best we can do from the angle that we're taking, which is evaluating Fulfilling Lives as a programme itself. But yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's really important to have some sort of idea of what added value this adds to sort of systems change activities.
Brilliant, Joe. And if people do have, if there are other areas of research going on outside of Fulfilling Lives, kind of based around system change activity and the involvement of lived experience, please do let us know, get in touch, or let us know in the comment box if you want to share. I am conscious of time, so we need to kind of draw the webinar to a close now. So a huge thank you to Chris, Sheila, Phil and Joe for your presentations, and to everyone else for such interesting comments and discussions throughout. I hope you found the session useful. If you didn't get a chance to ask something, or there's anything that comes to mind after the webinar, please do get in touch with us. So my email address is up on the screen now, and you can also follow us on Twitter, so FL Evaluation, and we've got the a quarterly newsletter as well, so a great way to keep up to date with upcoming events and our recent publications too. So all that remains from me is to say thank you ever so much and have a lovely afternoon.